At precisely 6:30 a.m., John Mallory raises the American flag in front of his porch, same as he's done every day for 30 years. The morning is quiet except for the gentle whir of an old automatic sprinkler 2 houses down, and the faint screech of metal from the pulley as the flag catches the breeze. His fingers, still steady despite their age, tighten the rope with the same care he used when teaching new recruits in Okinawa back in '73. Max, his golden retriever, sits patiently at his feet, eyes following the flag as it climbs into place. The base of the pole creaks slightly in the chilled November air, just enough to catch the attention of someone standing across the street. John doesn't turn around, but he feels it, the sort of invisible shift you sense in a quiet neighborhood where small things speak loudly. He stands a moment longer, eyes on the flag as it ripples softly against the dawn. Then, with a pat on Max's head, he steps back inside. The scent of freshly brewed coffee greets him like a familiar friend. His old Sears drip machine gurgles once more before falling silent, declaring the job done. He pours a cup into a thick, tan ceramic mug that reads Semper Fi in faded black letters. It was a gift from his late wife, Evelyn, back when she still sent handwritten notes and bought little things just because. Outside, the last of the leaves cling to the oaks lining Maple Grove Lane, brittle and brown against a steel-gray sky. The air has that crisp, dry sharpness that makes your lungs work just a bit harder. A few porch lights flick off in sequence as the sun fights its way up through the trees. Across the street, Tyrone Bates steps out onto his porch, dressed in a dark navy windbreaker and wool slippers. He holds a steaming mug and raises it in salute. "Still beating the sunrise, huh, John?" he calls. John offers a short wave, discipline's hard to shake. "Lucky Max," Tyrone chuckles. "Dog's the only one around here who gets parade honors at breakfast." Max thumps his tail once, clearly pleased. A few doors down, the rhythmic click of firm steps approaches. Karen Whitmore rounds the corner, clipboard tucked under her arm like she's inspecting troop barracks. Her lips pressed together in a line so practiced it might as well be painted on. Her bobbed hair is perfectly in place, despite the breeze, and her blazer bears a small, tasteful HOA pin. "Morning, Mr. Mallory," she says, pausing just long enough to seem cordial. "Morning," John replies, voice even. Her gaze flicks to the flag, lingering just a beat too long, then moves on. She continues down the sidewalk, marking something on her sheet with a red pen. John watches her go without another word. Later that day, after trimming his hedges and oiling the hinges on the back gate, tasks he performed more from habit than necessity, John retrieves his mail from the old brass box affixed to the porch. There's a utility bill, a flyer for a Thanksgiving canned goods drive, and a single white envelope marked AOO, official notice. No return address, but it carries the sharp weight of something meant to unsettle. He opens it right there on the porch. Notice of violation, it reads, unapproved flagpole installation, code 3.1b, penalty $100 0 cents. He scans the page once more, then a third time, the flagpole, the same one he installed in 1993 with the help of 2 neighbors, a cooler of beer, and a borrowed post-hole digger. The concrete base had barely cracked in all these years. Max whines softly beside him, sensing the shift in his energy. "It's all right, boy," John says, rubbing the dog's ears. "We've been through worse." He walks inside, slides the notice onto the kitchen table, and sits heavily in the old oak chair Evelyn used to prefer because it had the best view of the bird feeder. He sips his coffee slowly, eyes on the paper. Then, without rush, he rises and walks down the hall to the study. The room is small, tidy, and lined with framed certificates, some military, others from community events over the years. A folded flag sits under glass on the shelf above the desk. He unlocks the filing cabinet in the corner, one of those beige metal ones with a stubborn drawer that sticks. He knows exactly what he's looking for. Inside a red manila folder labeled Vets and Legal, he pulls out a printed copy of the Ohio Veterans Display Protection Act, double-sided, underlined in places, dog-eared at the top. He brings it back to the kitchen, lays it on the table beside the violation notice. The documents touch like opposing weights on a scale, one inked in bureaucratic protocol, the other grounded in something deeper, service, sacrifice, and principle. He murmurs, "You picked the wrong battle, Karen," and places the law beside the violation slip. John never minded rules. He'd followed them all his life, until now. He poked at the crust of his over-medium eggs with the edge of his fork, letting the yolk run into his toast. Across from him, Tyrone poured a packet of sugar into his coffee with exaggerated care, watching the crystals swirl into the black. Betty's diner hadn't changed in 20 years. Same vinyl booths, Same flickering specials board with a daily quote. That morning's read, "Loyalty isn't blind. It sees and stays anyway." John feared someone had been watching the news too much. "You gonna fight it?" Tyrone asked, voice low, trying not to draw attention from the other two patrons seated at the counter. John sighed. "Not with shouting, no." Tyrone smirked. "You're doing that quiet storm thing again." John wiped his fingers and reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, pulling out a folded sheet of paper. Karen sent the violation like it was a parking ticket, didn't even cite the code right. He placed it flat on the table next to the sugar caddy. Tyrone leaned in, eyes narrowing behind his glasses. 3.1b? That's the landscaping code. That's not even the flag rule. "She's playing catch-up," John said, "and hoping no one notices." "Noticed it when she fined me for using a tomato cage last summer," Tyrone muttered. "Said it was visual clutter. I told her my backyard wasn't a museum." They chuckled, but the laughter didn't linger. "Ever heard of Miriam Delaney?" Tyrone asked after a beat. John nodded. "Retired lawyer, right? She lives over on Larkspur." HOA went after a garden. Said her sunflowers were over regulation height. Miriam sued and won. She didn't shout. She didn't curse. She just outrode them. "I might pay her a visit," John said, sipping his coffee. "Soon." That afternoon, John attended the HOA meeting held in the crisp, white-painted clubhouse with its lemon-scented floor and rows of neatly arranged plastic chairs. Karen stood at the front with her signature clipboard, flipping pages like a conductor before a silent orchestra. The room was half full, mostly retirees, a few new families in the back scrolling their phones, the kind of crowd that didn't love confrontation but liked hearing about it. John waited until open comments. He stood slowly, wearing his pressed flannel and weathered khakis. "I'd like to address the notice I received," he said, "regarding my flagpole." Karen didn't smile. "But Mallory, this isn't the time for individual disputes." John held up the paper. "I just want to clarify, this flag has flown in the same place for 3 decades. It predates the current HOA charter, and Ohio law allows veterans to display the flag without restriction." Karen's lips tightened. "We're not debating patriotism, Mr. Mallory. We're enforcing standards." That silenced the room. A man in the second row looked up from his phone. An older woman in the back shifted in her chair. "I understand," John said quietly. "But perhaps the standards need a closer reading?" Karen tapped her pen once, sharp against her clipboard. "You may submit a formal appeal. That concludes this matter." He sat. The room moved on, but something had changed. From the side of the room, Heather Whitmore had been watching quietly. She hadn't planned to attend the meeting, but her mother insisted it would show her how things are run around here. Heather hadn't expected the man who spoke to be so measured, or the tone of the room to change when he stood. Back at Karen's house that evening, the silence between mother and daughter filled the living room like thick wool. Karen typed furiously on her HOA laptop. Heather stood near the kitchen, arms crossed. "That man's flag is causing division," Karen said, not looking up. Heather tilted her head. "Or maybe the way you're handling it is—" Karen looked up then. "I'm not the villain here. I didn't say you were." But the implication sat heavy in the room. Meanwhile, across the street, John sat at his kitchen table, reading by lamplight. His dog lay curled at his feet, breathing slow. The binder of HOA bylaws lay open in front of him, alongside a printout of the Ohio Revised Code. He'd highlighted entire passages now. Section 531174 stood out. "No association may prohibit the display of the United States flag by a property owner who is a veteran." He typed a letter, careful and deliberate. It was not emotional, it was not defiant. It was lawful, structured, and backed by precedent. He signed it, attached the appropriate exhibits, and sealed the envelope. The next morning he walked to the mailbox and sent it off, certified with return receipt. Across the street, Karen noticed him drop the envelope into the box. She didn't wave. She only turned and walked inside. Later that evening, John stood on his porch with Max at his side. He bent down to retrieve the mail, feeling the ache in his knees remind him he wasn't 30 anymore. Among the circulars and local advertisements was another plain white envelope, same size and font as the last. He opened it right there. The next day a second notice appeared. Unauthorized display during non-holiday week, fine increased to $200, 0 cents. John wasn't looking for a fight, but he knew how to finish one. In the quiet of his garage, John leaned over the workbench he'd built with his father in 1964. now stained with decades of oil, sawdust, and memories. Above it, a pegboard held everything from socket wrenches to gardening twine, each in its place. An old transistor radio murmured big band jazz in the background, crackling slightly in the corners. Max lay nearby, half asleep, his ears twitching at the occasional hammer tap. On the workbench sat the heart of John's resistance. A laminated plaque mounted to a cedar post, its face engraved with bold serif font. Ohio Revised Code SS 5311.074 Veteran Display Protection. It was to be planted directly beside the flagpole. Tyrone entered through the side door, wiping his boots and holding 2 styrofoam cups from Betty's. He handed one over. "Morning," he said. John gave a nod of thanks. "Vanilla cream and no sugar?" "You know me." They stood in silence a moment, steam rising between them. "She's doubling down," Tyrone said finally. Last night she posted some new memo about visual integrity and non-seasonal symbols." "Which," John replied, "isn't in the handbook. Page 12, Section 4, seasonal displays only refer to holidays, lighting, and inflatable decor." Tyrone chuckled. "You've turned this into a full recon mission." John gave a half smile. "You remember what we used to say? Win by the book, even if the book's stacked against you." "Damn right." They installed the post that afternoon. John measured twice, aligning the plaque exactly 1 foot from the pole and 3 feet from the walkway, in full compliance with setback requirements. The metal stake sank into the frozen soil with 2 precise strikes. When it was done, it stood straight, dignified, and unimpeachable. By the next morning, someone had taken a photo. It showed up on the community Facebook page under the caption, "Veteran or Vigilante? What do we think about Mr. Mallory's sign?" The comment section was unexpectedly kind. "He's not hurting anyone. Better than another inflatable turkey. Honestly, I didn't even know that was a real, well, good for him." 2 houses down, a young mother named Chelsea approached with a stroller and asked softly, "Could I get a copy of that statute? My dad's flag got taken down last spring. I didn't know you could fight back." John offered her a small envelope with a printed copy. "It's public record," he said. Across the street, Heather watched from behind the blinds. She'd returned early from a visit to Karen's clubhouse office, having dropped off her mother's dry cleaning and helped organize a few files. But curiosity got the better of her. Karen had left her laptop open, password auto-filtered, and Heather had clicked into a folder titled Beautification Projects. Inside were dozens of disbursement records, mulch for a non-existent community rose garden, frequent charges to a landscaping vendor whose address matched a business registered to Glenn Barlow's cousin, and over $2,000, 0 cents, marked discretionary fund, fence screening, approved via oral vote. None of it looked right. She took photos with her phone, heart pounding. That evening, Tyrone called John and asked him to meet someone. At Betty's diner, the lights were soft and the booths half filled with the usual crowd. At a back table near the pie display sat a woman with steel-gray hair swept into a practical bun and reading glasses perched on her nose. She wore a denim jacket with a patch that read, Property Rights League, Ohio Chapter. "Miriam Delaney," she said, extending her hand. "You must be the flag guy." "John Mallory," he replied, "guilty as charged." They talked for 40 minutes. Miriam listened closely as John laid out his documentation, citations, meeting minutes, a timeline of the fines. He passed her the binder. She read in silence, lips pursed. "I've seen these kinds of boards before," she said finally. "They bank on no one pushing back. The minute someone does, they flinch, but only if that someone's prepared." "I am," John said quietly. She closed the binder. "You've got something here. They're counting on silence." Heather didn't sleep well that night. She sat on the edge of the guest bed in Karen's house, scrolling through the photos on her phone, highlighting, rereading, questioning what she knew about the woman down the hall. The next morning, Karen stood alone in her study, tapping her index finger against her chin. A half-empty coffee mug sat forgotten beside the HOA binder. She opened her laptop and typed quickly into the HOA portal's draft section. Then she paused, staring at the blinking cursor, before typing the header in all caps. Emergency board session. Authorization for lien enforcement. In a neighborhood where every blade of grass is measured, John's flag became the line no one could ignore. The lawn had never looked better. John had edged it to regulation depth, 2 inches along every border, and repainted the curb number in crisp white with navy stencils. His mailbox was freshly scrubbed and repositioned precisely 24 inches from the sidewalk, just as HOA guidelines required. But what caught everyone's eye wasn't the precision, it was the quiet defiance layered beneath it. He stood out front with Max lying at his feet, sipping coffee from a faded Marine Corps mug as the flag fluttered above. A new sign had joined the laminated Ohio law plaque, a simple notice with a cheerful serif font that read, "Compliant and proud, ask me how." Across the street, Mrs. Dalton paused mid-dog walk. "John, do you know if there's a height rule for wind chimes?" "There is," he said without judgment, "but it only applies if they're visible from the sidewalk." "Ah," she said, "I never knew." By noon, 3 neighbors had stopped to ask for copies of the state code, and one had returned with banana bread and a question about mailbox paint colors. The tide wasn't turning, it was rolling. Inside the HOA clubhouse, Karen paced the front of the room in her usual blazer, but something in her movements had changed. The tight efficiency was still there, but now it was punctuated by moments of distraction. A twitch of her jaw, a glance at her phone, a whisper to herself. She didn't realize, at volume. "The board needs emergency authority," she said, holding up a printed motion. "We're facing coordinated non-compliance." Susan Kim adjusted her glasses. "Coordinated how?" "Look at Mr. Mallory's display. It's weaponized conformity. He's turning bylaws into a protest." Glenn Barlow coughed. "But he's, following the rules?" Karen narrowed her eyes. "That's the problem. He's following them too well." The motion to authorize immediate lien enforcement failed to pass. Glenn voted no. Susan abstained. When Karen left the meeting early, she didn't notice Heather slipping back into the house, her laptop under her arm. Upstairs in Karen's office, Heather typed quietly, her fingers moving with the kind of familiarity that came from years of helping with HOA newsletters and formatting spreadsheets as a teenager. A folder marked Beautification Projects caught her eye again. She opened it. One vendor had billed the HOA twice in 2 weeks for seasonal ground cover. Another entry showed a payment of $1,300.00 for community benches, none of which Heather had seen in Lakewood Pines. And there it was again, the discretionary fund, a string of transactions marked verbal board approval. She dragged the entire folder to a flash drive and slid it into her pocket. That evening, Tyrone's garage smelled faintly of coffee and WD-40. The lawn chairs had been arranged in a rough circle. A folding table held a platter of donuts and a printout titled, "Know Your Rights, a Guide for Lakewood Pines Residents." On the garage wall, his old Air Force banner hung next to a large whiteboard listing HOA codes by number and keyword. "All right," Tyrone said, clapping his hands. "Let's get started." Miriam sat near the front, legs crossed, reading glasses perched low. She spoke calmly, walking the group through the process of challenging fines, submitting records, and recognizing unlawful enforcement. She passed around a draft of a cease and desist letter. "I've tailored this for your situation," she said, nodding to John. "It cites both state law and civil precedent." John read the language with a slight lift of the eyebrow. It was firm, precise, unapologetic. Tyrone handed Heather a pen. "You good helping with formatting?" She nodded. "I can clean it up and send it to the board." "Tonight?" Miriam smiled. "Smart and brave. Your dad would be proud." Heather looked down, unsure whether the warmth she felt was pride or something more conflicted. By morning, Karen was at her desk reading the email. It was clear, thorough, and copied to the entire HOA board. Her jaw clenched as her eyes reached the sender line. "H. Whitmore." She pushed back from the desk, the wheels of her chair rolling too far, nearly tipping her. She stood in the quiet, shaking just slightly, hands curled at her sides. Her daughter had turned on her. She walked to the window and stared at John's lawn across the street, immaculate and infuriating. Then she turned back to her laptop and opened the HOA portal. Her fingers struck the keys in a fury. "This behavior will not be tolerated. We are prepared to escalate." The flag had become a mirror, and Karen didn't like what she saw in it anymore. Sunlight spilled through the slats of the blinds in Karen's home office, but it brought no warmth. The room was tidy, almost aggressively so, with color-coded folders in stacked trays and framed HOA awards on the walls. A half-empty glass of white wine sat beside her mousepad. It wasn't even noon. Karen sat at her desk, rereading the cease-and-desist letter that had arrived 2 days prior. Every time she reached the line, "in violation of both Ohio Revised Code SS 5311.074 and Principles of Fair Governance," her hand tightened around the stem of the glass. She set it down hard enough that Max, visible through the front window across the street, perked up from John's porch and stared. Down the hallway, Heather leaned against the doorframe, watching. "You used to fight for expression," she said softly. Karen didn't turn around. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You remember that mural at my elementary school? The one you helped us paint when I was in 3rd grade? You said freedom of expression was part of what made our country beautiful." Karen sighed, still not facing her. "That was art, Heather. It didn't defy structure. Bending it," Heather crossed her arms. "You're not protecting the neighborhood anymore. You're trying to control it." Karen's jaw tensed. "The community needs boundaries." "Or it needs to breathe," Heather said. She left the room without waiting for a reply. Across the neighborhood, John sat at his garage workbench, a stack of papers neatly laid out before him. He wore his reading glasses low, flipping through each page with quiet focus. Miriam had sent over a draft of the complaint. The header alone made him sit a little straighter. Mallory v. Lockwood Pines HOA, et al. The filing included claims of wrongful enforcement, violation of the Ohio Veteran Display Protection Act, and misuse of community funds. Attached were photocopies of the violation notices, annotated versions of the bylaws, and sworn affidavits from 4 residents who'd been fined for infractions not listed in any official handbook. Thion stood nearby, arms crossed. "It's clean. Surgical. Just like you used to teach me back in the Corps." "I didn't teach," John said, lips curving slightly. "I suggested strongly."
They both chuckled. Meanwhile, at Miriam's small but orderly law office, the sound of the stamp echoed across the reception desk as the clerk confirmed the lawsuit was officially filed. Miriam smiled as she watched the assistant place the documents in a delivery envelope. She'd fought dozens of these battles, but this one felt different. Personal. Measured. That afternoon, Heather received a visitor. Glenn Barlow stood nervously on her porch, holding an unusable grocery bag that clinked faintly with paper inside. I didn't know where else to go," he said. Heather opened the door wider. In her kitchen, Glenn pulled out a series of manila envelopes, photocopies, receipts, minutes from unofficial meetings, and 3 emails from Karen marked internal only. "She pressured me," he said. "Said it was all above board. But some of these payments, they don't smell right." Heather scanned one of the emails, her stomach tightening. "Use beautification fund. Don't list under general repairs. Residents don't read line items." "You have to give these to Miriam," she said. "I will. I just wanted you to know first. I believed in this place once." Back in his garage, John opened a weathered letter from his file box. It was dated July 5, 1971. The handwriting was neat, steady. "John's, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. Tell my mom I went out with my boots on, not scared. You always said dignity matters. Keep your chin up. Fly that flag. For both of us. Ramirez." John folded the letter carefully, eyes damp but clear. Then he went back to work. Later that evening, a notification pinged on Karen's screen. A new message from the HOA legal liaison. She clicked it open and saw a scanned image of a certified envelope. Already delivered. The subject line: "Notice of civil action. You are named in Mallory v. Lakewood Pines HOA."
Her throat dried. She reached for her wine, then stopped. Outside, the wind rustled a flag she didn't want to see.
The doorbell rang.
Karen opened it to find a young woman in a blazer holding a microphone. "Mrs. Whitmore," the reporter began, "is it true you fined a veteran for flying the American flag?"
On the Saturday before Veterans Day, Lakewood Pines didn't just raise flags, they raised voices.
The sun had barely cracked over the rooftops when the first flags began to rise. At exactly 6:30 a.m., one by one, porches across the neighborhood awakened with the quiet rustle of nylon, the squeak of flagpole pulleys, and the soft thud of boots on wooden steps. No one spoke. No speeches, no banners, no protests. Just flags. American flags on aluminum mounts, garden hooks, makeshift poles, each raised with slow, deliberate reverence. It was Tyrone's idea, and the community embraced it in full. From her window, Karen watched the scene unfold in silence. Her coffee sat untouched on the table. Her hands trembled, not from cold, but from something deeper, an unraveling that even she couldn't name. She glanced toward her phone. Still no messages. Glenn hadn't returned her last 3 calls. Susan had replied with a single sentence, "You need to take a step back."
Karen closed the curtain and walked to her office. The walls that once made her feel in control now felt like they were pressing in. The printer light blinked green, but the room was hush. No buzzing activity, no calls to return, no meetings to plan. She was president of a board that no longer followed her.
The night before, Channel 12 News had aired a segment titled "Flag Finds Spark Lawsuit in Veterans Neighborhood." It opened with a wide shot of John's porch, the flag backlit by amber twilight. The reporter's voice narrated a summary of the case, followed by a calm, articulate interview with Miriam Delaney. "This isn't just about bylaws," Miriam had said. "It's about recognizing when procedure becomes punishment and when good people stand up to say enough." Heather appeared briefly in the segment too, standing beside Miriam outside the courthouse. She didn't say much, just that she supported transparency and believed the community deserved honest leadership. Karen had watched that moment alone, mouth dry, fingers digging into the armrest of her chair. That morning her inbox was flooded, not with support, but condemnation. The HOA Facebook group had exploded, posts flooded. "I used to think Karen cared, now I just think she's afraid of being wrong."
Mr. Mallory served our country. We can't even let him raise a flag.
"This isn't about rules. This is about control." Karen had tried to respond with a formal statement. She called John's actions a performative provocation designed to incite division. But it only made things worse.
Betty's Diner had the news playing on the mounted TV above the pie case. Regulars watched in near silence as the segment reran, the whole place pausing when John's name was mentioned. He wasn't there. He'd politely declined every interview request. Instead, he was in his garage, carefully reviewing affidavits with Miriam, a stack of tabbed folders spread before them. He didn't want the spotlight. He wanted resolution.
Tyrone, meanwhile, had become the neighborhood's informal point man. He handed out flyers, organized meetings, even stood at the curb that morning, handing out small folded flags to kids walking dogs with their parents. "You don't have to speak loud," he told them, "just speak true." By evening, Glenn and Susan had quietly held a meeting at Susan's kitchen table. The rest of the board, what was left of it, attended by speakerphone. Karen wasn't invited. They discussed options. Glenn read from the bylaws. Susan cleared her throat and said, "It's time." They agreed to call for Karen's resignation, citing fractured trust and failure to represent the community's values. The next day, the court issued a notice. Mallory v. Lakewood Pines, HOA, would be heard on December 2nd. Karen stared at the printed notice on her kitchen counter. She hadn't left the house since the news story aired. She tried to rehearse her arguments, but the words didn't come. Instead, she found herself standing in front of a photo on the wall, a family portrait taken 10 years ago. Heather was smiling, braces just off, arm around Karen's shoulders. Karen reached out and touched the frame. Her fingers lingered. Later, she stood at the front door of the law office for the pretrial conference, nerves buzzing beneath her skin. Her reflection in the glass looked tired. Her lipstick was too bright. She adjusted her blouse collar and stepped inside. The receptionist greeted her, then gestured toward the small conference room. Karen walked in. At the end of the table sat Miriam, calm as ever, flipping through a binder, and beside her, wearing a blazer and reading from a stack of notes, was Heather. To some, it was about bylaws and fences. To John, it was about something you never fold under, principle. The morning air held a bite, the kind that cut through gloves and lingered in your chest. John stood outside the courthouse steps in his navy wool coat, buttoning it with methodical care. As he reached the top button, his fingers paused at the small Marine Corps pin on his lapel. He adjusted it gently the same way he had on the day he buried Evelyn, and years earlier before stepping onto a transport plane bound for Beirut. Max wasn't with him today. Courthouses didn't allow dogs, but John still glanced over his shoulder as if expecting the old retriever to be there anyway. Flags lined the path to the door, a quiet salute from the town's veteran committee. School children stood behind the windows across the street, some holding handmade signs. "Thank you, Mr. Mallory," one read. Inside the courtroom was modest wood paneling, a single row of pews for observers, and a state seal above the judge's bench. John took his seat beside Miriam, who wore a charcoal blazer and calm like armor. She didn't speak as the bailiff called the room to order, but her fingers tapped lightly against her folder, keeping rhythm with the swelling momentum behind her case. Judge Franklin entered, a tall, silver-hailed man whose gaze could silence a room, and nodded for opening statement. Miriam stood. "Your Honor," she began, "this is not a case about landscaping. It's not even a case about a flagpole. It is a case about dignity, about the right of a man who served his country to display that service with pride, and about a system that, in its rigid pursuit of control, forgot the people it was meant to serve." Her tone never rose. It didn't need to. The defense followed with a clinical approach. Their attorney, a man in an ill-fitting suit, cited pages of bylaws and stressed uniform enforcement of HOA. But things began to crack when Heather was called to the stand. She sat tall, her voice clear but edged with pain. "My mother used to tell me that good leadership meant knowing when to listen. I think somewhere along the way she forgot that." There was a hush in the courtroom. She was trying to protect the look of the neighborhood, but in doing that, she stopped seeing the people in it. Karen flinched in her seat. Next came Glenn, bearing records under subpoena, line items from the beautification fund showing payments to phantom vendors, inconsistencies in approval processes, and receipts with Karen's signature that never passed a board vote. Susan Kim corroborated, her voice low but firm. There was pressure. We didn't always know where the money was going. Karen took the stand last. Her hands trembled as she was sworn in. Her answers were clipped, evasive. "I believed I was doing what was best for the community," she said. Marion stepped forward. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said gently, "did you ever consider that your enforcement of this particular rule might violate a veteran's legal rights under state law?" Karen hesitated. "I?" The silence stretched. She looked to Heather, who didn't look away. "I didn't think about that part," Karen said, voice barely audible. The room was still. In closing, Mariam stood once more. "Laws and regulations are meant to serve communities, not to strangle them. Mr. Mallory didn't resist these rules with hostility. He complied. Respectfully, completely. But even his compliance was weaponized against him, because this wasn't about order, it was about power, and dignity does not yield to power." The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the foreperson rose. "We find in favor of the plaintiff, John Mallory. The HOA is found liable for wrongful enforcement, harassment, and financial misconduct. Damages in the amount of $3,500,000, 0 cents are awarded. HOA leadership must undergo structural reform with oversight by a third-party legal auditor." There was no cheering, just a quiet exhale across the room. John stood. Miriam touched his arm. Outside the courthouse, the breeze had shifted slightly warmer. The sun hung lower, casting long shadows across the steps. Reporters stood behind ropes, cameras blinking red, but John didn't stop for them. He walked slowly toward the sidewalk. Karen exited through the back. She moved stiffly, shoulders rounded, as if the judgment weighed on her physically. As she passed John, he looked at her, not with glee, not with triumph, just clarity. "You were wrong," he said softly, "but I hope you find peace." Karen didn't respond. But she didn't walk faster, either. Heather stood by the courthouse steps, watching them both. She didn't smile. She didn't move. But as her mother walked by, she didn't turn away. On Veterans Day morning, every porch on Magnolia Lane flew a flag. No fines, no forms, no fear. The sunrise came soft and clear, casting a golden wash across the rooftops of Lakewood Pines. John stood on his front steps, Max at his side, the flag in his hands. He moved with quiet reverence, raising it as he had for decades, but this time, as it caught the breeze, he wasn't alone. Flags flapped in unison down the block, some crisp and new, others well-worn and sun-faded. Even the small corner lot that had stood empty for months now had a flag planted in its grass. No one spoke at first. They didn't need to. The sound of fabric rustling in the wind said enough. Later that morning, the neighborhood gathered in the park, where the trees were wrapped in red, white, and blue ribbons, and rows of folding chairs faced a makeshift stage. Card tables were lined with homemade pies and crockpots, while kids in school T-shirts ran around waving miniature flags. A banner above the gazebo read, "Veterans Day, Honoring Trust." Tyrone, now officially chair of the new HOA committee, welcomed everyone with a steady voice and easy smile. His remarks were short. "We're not just turning a page today, we're writing a new one, together." Applause came gently, warmly, like a neighborhood exhale. Heather followed, standing tall behind the mic. "We've all learned something," she said, "about power, about rules, and about what it means to truly serve a community, not with control, but with care." She didn't mention her mother by name, but her voice trembled slightly as she concluded, "There's no perfect neighborhood, but there are still good people willing to make it better." Afterward, John was invited to speak, but he declined the podium with a polite shake of the head. Instead, he walked to the flagpole at the park's edge, raised the stars and stripes, and saluted. It was simple. Wordless, every child stood straighter, every adult held still. A group of second graders led the Pledge of Allegiance, their small voices steady and proud. As the ceremony wound down, people lingered. Neighbors who had once exchanged only cold glances now passed slices of pecan pie and cups of cider. A few whispered apologies. Others shared laughter that had been missing too long. At the far end of the park, the HOA mailbox had a new note pinned inside, handwritten in elegant cursive. "I lost my way. I'm sorry for the hurt. QW." That night, John sat on his porch as dusk crept in. Max curled at his feet. The flag rustled softly in the breeze, lit from below by the porch light Evelyn had picked out 20 years earlier. He leaned back in his chair, looking out at the street, calm and still. "It's not the flag that makes us free," he said quietly, more to the wind than anyone else. "It's what we do when it's threatened." On a quiet winter morning, the flags in Lakewood Pines still rise at dawn, just like they always did, but now with a deeper meaning. The courtroom verdict brought legal change, yes, but what lingered longer was the shift in hearts, neighbors nodding again across fences, no longer afraid to speak. Rules, it turned out, could protect or divide, a truth that only became clear when one man stood quietly and reminded them what they were meant for. When we stand for dignity, even without shouting, we teach others to listen. Like the steady flutter of a flag in cold morning air, one peaceful stand can awaken a silent neighborhood.